Sorry about that. Okay, welcome to this talk this morning, Primate Conversations talk. This is the fourth of this series, and we welcome Andie Ang this morning. Andie is a primatologist, and even in the introduction, if I went through the many species that Andie has been studying and working with collaborative efforts for conservation of these species, it would take up most of it. So I'll just summarize that Andie's been working with many, studying many primates, including Gibbons in Thailand, langurs and dukes in Vietnam, langurs in Singapore and Malaysia. And we can see such efforts and collaborative efforts on the IUCN Red List, much needed data on these primates on the Red List of threatened species, publications, book chapters, on her primate watching project, which you can access through Twitter and online, which allows and provides an accessible information for people on primates across the continents. Andie has received the Great Women of Our Time Award from Women's Weekly for her contribution to positive change in society, her work on environment and wildlife conservation, the Conservationist Award from the American Society of Primatologists. She's currently the president of the Jane Goodall Institute of Singapore. She's a member of the IUCN Species Survival Commission and the Primate Specialist Group of Asia. Andie is also affiliated with the Department of Anthropology at the University of Colorado at Boulder, where she completed her PhD on population genetics, behavior and diet of Vietnamese primates, and also the Evolutionary Biology Laboratory at the National University of Singapore, where she also completed her Masters in Biology on the Raffles banded langurs, which she's also a chair of a working group for this primate. So, wow. Thank you so much, Andie, for joining us today, and I will pass over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introductions and really for this opportunity to share about the work that I do on primates in Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. And I hope that at the end of the presentation, we could actually do a sharing session with all of you, because I would like to learn more about how we could also improve on the tools and the ways that we do to research and conserve primates around the world. So thank you for this opportunity. I thought I would start off by sharing how I got started in this field of primate conservation and research. So when I was doing my bachelor degrees at the National University of Singapore, I was interested in monkeys, but I didn't know what options or opportunities there were. I approached the Singapore Zoo to learn more about the captive primates and how hand preferences was being exhibited in primates, because we know that more than 90% of humans are right-handed. So I was interested to know if non-human primates also show this trend. During this time, when I was doing the work at Singapore Zoo, I had the opportunity to visit Khao Yai National Park in Thailand to look at wild gibbons with Dr. Warren Brockerman. And that's when I could do a comparison between captive primates and also the ones in the wild. It was during that short few weeks in Thailand in the field that made me realize I really enjoy running in the forest. And so for my master's degree in biology, also at the National University of Singapore, I wanted to learn more about our native primates. And in Singapore, we have 3 species of non-human primates. So here on this slide, you see the Raffles banded langur. It's a species of monkey that only reside in the central part of Singapore, and not much was known about this species, such that people thought it might have been extinct already. So I did a 2-year field project on this species to find out more about its population size, distribution, threats, diet, genetics, and so on. It was only a very short 2-year project to gather this basic information, but I thought that I didn't want to stop learning more about langurs and the threats that they face. So I decided to further my studies to do a degree in biological anthropology at the University of Colorado Boulder to look at one of the top 25 most endangered primates in the world. And here on this slide, you can see the Tonkin snub-nosed monkey. And so this species is only found in the northern parts of Vietnam. At the moment, it's believed that they are only found in 5 different isolated populations with a global population size of fewer than 250. Hence, they're critically endangered. And so I spent about 3 months at the top of the mountain. That's about 1,800 meters above sea level, to try to track down these elusive primates and to collect their fecal samples in order to examine their inbreeding risks through genetic analysis. During this time when I was doing my PhD, I had the chance to also study another species of langur. And here you can see on the slide is the Indo-Chinese silvered langur. It's also an endangered species of langur, but this time is found in the southern parts of Vietnam. So I went all the way from northern Vietnam to southern Vietnam, and this time is on the limestone karsts that are in the southern parts of Vietnam. Unfortunately, this area, the habitat, it's highly threatened because of limestone mining. And so you can see that lots of the forest habitats were gone. Working with the agencies and authorities in southern Vietnam, we are trying to construct artificial road bridges in order to facilitate the langurs to cross from one forest patch to another safely, so that we can then enhance our conservation efforts to protect those langurs in protected reserves. And it was during this time that I would say I learned a lot by being out of my comfort zone in a foreign country, being a foreigner who can't speak the language, Vietnamese, and to really try to navigate my way by working with government agency, NGO, research institutes, and the community to try to align our vision to protect the langurs and to support the community in the area. And so I was really fortunate that I met the right people who were helping me along the way, especially as you can see in this photo, and also my professor at University of Colorado Boulder. So I've just shared, my experiences working with a few species of primates, but they are all Columbine primates, as you can see. And so I have this special interest in leaf-eating monkeys, Columbine primates, and in particular in Southeast Asia, where I'm from. If you look at the diversity of Columbine primates, we have 6 genera of Columbine primates, from Presbytes, Trachypithecus, Rhinopithecus, Picatrix, Simius to Nassalis. And in particular, for Presbytes langurs in Southeast Asia, there are 19 species. And you can see on this slide that with the exception of 3 species highlighted in blue, the rest of the 16 species are considered threatened under the IUCN Red List. So they're either vulnerable, endangered, or critically endangered due to mainly habitat loss. And out of these 19 species of Presbytes langurs, I'm particularly interested in 3 of them, namely the Raffles banded langurs, which is found in Singapore, where I'm from, and also Malaysia. The East Sumatran banded langur, found in Sumatra in Indonesia, and also the Robinson's banded langur, found in the northern parts of Malaysia, Thailand, and Myanmar. So today I'll just be sharing a bit about the work that we do with the Raffles banded langur and the East Sumatran banded langur. So for this species, we're talking about roughly 70 individuals left in Singapore and only a few hundred in Malaysia, but we don't have the precise population estimate in Malaysia, unfortunately. For this species, the adult is mostly black in color, but the infant is born mostly white in color. So here is the rare footage that we managed to capture by working with a filmmaker for a couple of months to track these langurs, because we know that they're really elusive and they're found high up on the canopy. So we're talking about 12 to sometimes 50 meters above the ground. And during this time when they have infants, they're especially protective of their babies. And so they will mostly be hiding up on the trees. This footage actually enabled us to find out, number one, that this baby is a male, and that it belongs to a troop of 12 individuals that we have been following. So it's important for us to capture images like this so that we can monitor over time, and to also use those images and videos to do our outreach activities. So after about 8 to 10 months, the infant would turn into a black coloration like the adult fur coloration. In 2016, we formed a Raffles banded langur working group because we believe that it is necessary to gather all the expertise on the ground from various institutions, NGOs, or private, public government agencies in order to brainstorm how we can better conserve this species in the wild. So in 2016, we formed this banded langur working group with 3 main goals in mind. The first is to recover and protect this species in the wild. Second is to gather key information through long-term monitoring efforts. And third is to secure necessary resources and commitments, whether is it funding or manpower, to ensure that this conservation project can be sustainable in the long run. And so first of all, we really need to find out how many individuals were left in Singapore and Malaysia. So starting from Singapore, we wanted to capture photographs of each individual that we can find in Singapore. And given that Singapore is pretty small, we were fortunately able to actually track each individual. So at the moment, there are 70 Raffles banded langurs left in Singapore, and we have been building this family tree that you can see here. It's important for us to do this so that we can track infant development, growth, and also dispersion of these individuals as they grow older. Another thing that we do for our field observational research work is to install camera traps on trees in order to examine the distribution of the langurs within their range and also their habitat preferences. So it's still a work in progress. It's pretty challenging to navigate the secondary rainforest in Singapore, which a lot of times is very swampy and overall just a very challenging terrain. And also we have a lot to learn about camera trapping, the angle that we need to put, at which height, and also the specifications of the camera itself. Oh, we're getting there. It is also a good opportunity to find out more about the other species of arboreal wildlife that we can see within our habitat, such as the colugo, which is a gliding mammal, and also the flying squirrel. So most of the time, we don't really get to see them during our tracking for field observational work, but camera traps can actually help us to gather such information. Of course, our target species. It actually took us about 3 months before we actually captured the first photo of this species in the wild through camera trap images. We also found a few hotspots where the 3 native species of non-human primates can be found on the same area. So here you can see that the slow loris, the macaque, and the banded langur were actually found on the same tree, just at different times of the day. So it can actually help us to understand a bit more about their niche partitioning and also resource use and competition. Another area that we are interested to find out about on the langur is their diet. So we make use of field observational work to identify plant species that they consume, and also to collect fecal samples, which is what I'm pretty good at, collect poop sample, to examine their diet, and not just diet, but we can also find out more about the health of the individuals, and by looking at their parasite load and also microbiome. So the importance of Thesis is kind of what we are trying to advocate for in our general public, such that we actually produce posters on mammal scat in Singapore. The thing is that what we believe, when we are doing research work, is that the information gathered can actually be consolidated in a way such that the general public can easily digest and understand, and to see whether we can actually bring it to schools and the local community. So this posters on mammal scat is a good step to get the kids involved and interested. We also do a lot of education outreach activities. So before COVID, we could actually visit schools in Singapore and Malaysia to share with them more about the natural heritage that the two countries possess, and also how they can actually contribute to primate conservation. Because a lot of times the students don't really know what options there are when it comes to primate conservation or wildlife conservation, whether they're actually careers after they graduate in this course. And then in the middle, you can see that we also do a lot of outreach on the ground with the local community, because many of the residents that we talk to, they don't even know of the existence of this species in both countries. And so if you do not know that you have this species of critically endangered primate, it's very difficult for them to really understand what needs to be done and how they can contribute. And then on the far right, you can see that we also have a lot of meetings with stakeholders. So the stakeholders include the researchers, the funders, sponsors, and the government agencies in both countries, so that we can actually align our strategy to better conserve this species. And so I just want to highlight that most recently, we also produced a brochure called the Primates of Johor brochure to showcase the diversity of the primates that can be found on the southern parts of Peninsular Malaysia. And this resource is in print, and also there are electronic versions available in the 3 native languages in Malaysia, so that we can actually reach out to not just the general public, but also the government agencies and authorities. I mentioned earlier about getting the citizens involved. And so through this citizen science program that started in 2016, we have recruited nearly 300 volunteers to carry out field surveys on the langur on a 6-month basis. So every 6 months, we'll be recruiting volunteers and to train them on how to collect data on this species and other wildlife in the nature reserves. And they'll be out there to document the species that they see. So not just the langurs, but other plant species or animal species that they come across, and also the threats that they witness. So if there were poaching that were happening, or there were roadkills that were happening, they'll also be sending those information to us. And in particular, on a stretch of the survey route is this road where it cuts between the 2 forest patches in Singapore. And so during the field surveys, the citizen scientists recorded a few areas where the banded langurs had to come down to the ground to cross on the road. And this is when we were able to actually work with the national agency, the National Parks Board, to come up with ways to make it safer for the animals, such as the langurs, to navigate the habitat. So the first thing that was done was to convert the 2-lane road into a 1-lane road, such that you actually minimize the space that the cars can actually come in, and it's also safer for the humans to use. And another thing that we did was to construct canopy bridges for langurs and other arboreal species. And so we installed cameras on one end of the bridge to document when and which species actually utilize the structures. And it was only about 4 to 5 months after installation that we saw the Raffles banded langurs actually attempting to use successfully. And so here you can see that they were really curious about the camera and trying to eat it, but yeah, gave up in the end. And so with this, we regularly would check the data to document the species that were utilizing it, and whether we can actually improve the structure to make it more enticing for other species of animals to use. Another important aspect of the work that we are doing is on advocacy. So the data that we collect, we share with the national agencies and with the general public to highlight some of the things that are threatening the species, such as, for example, the construction of a train line that would cut into the habitat, and whether there are any mitigation measures that can be explored in order to minimize those impacts on the langurs and other wildlife. Whenever there are roadkills, we'll also be reporting this so that we can highlight the areas that are hotspots for roadkill, and to encourage the road users to be more mindful when they're driving in and around, I would say, like outside nature reserves. So that's for the Raffles banded langurs in Singapore. And at the same time, we are trying to work on a related species of banded langurs, which is the East Sumatran banded langur, found only in the eastern part of Sumatra in Indonesia. And so for this species of banded langur, we do not know how many individuals are left in the wild. We only know that they are found in a small area in Riau province in Sumatra. And looking at the primate diversity in Sumatra, they have 19 species, of which 8 species are Columbine primates. So you can see on the right side, there are 7 species of Prosbytus Columbine monkeys. And in particular, the Prosbytus purpura is critically endangered. The first thing that we did in order to gather, I would say, interest in the local community and also in the research institutions is to share more about primates in general, and also the primates that can be found in Sumatra, and to highlight possible collaborative work that could be done, that could be explored in order to research on the species and to protect the wildlife in Riau province. So it started with a talk in Andalas University that was hosted by the university and the staff to share more about the banded langurs in Singapore and the langurs in Sumatra. And afterwards, we went on an 8-day recce field work in eastern part of Sumatra with the help of Professor Rizaldi from Andalas University and a team of students to really go out there, to drive around the area, to talk to the local community and residents, to find out more about the primates that they see and whether they could actually identify the species. And then through this work, we were able to provide an updated information on the distribution of this species in Riau province, and also to highlight some of the threats that they're facing. In Riau province, there is a lot of deforestation because of oil palm plantations and also forest fires that are happening. And so at a very rapid rate, the forests are disappearing. And before we actually know how we can protect this species, they might be gone and it might be too late. So this is the first step where we gather the information on the distribution. And at the same time, using the fecal samples that were collected, we were able to actually identify that instead of a subspecies, because that was what they were initially classified as, the Sumatran banded langur is actually a species on its own, just like the Raffles banded langur. And so we could actually make use of this information to share with the authorities in order to urge for more work to be done before it's too late. And regularly we would be holding talks, now mostly virtually, in order to sustain that attention and interest on the langurs and also to build capacity. So we'll be holding workshops with not just Andalas University in Sumatra, but across the universities in Indonesia, so that we can actually gather more support from students and from researchers in order to expand the work that could be done between Indonesia and Singapore. And so this is my last slide. I would like to just highlight again the importance of collaborative efforts coming from experts on the ground, such as from the research institutions, the NGOs, which are mostly helping a lot on education efforts, and also the funding agencies that come in to provide the necessary resources. And also for everyone for listening. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Andie. Wow, that was really covered. So just really highlighted just the incredible efforts on your part and obviously collaborative efforts as well in conserving and understanding many of these understudied primates across these countries. We have lots of questions and they're still coming in. So I think if you're happy to, in terms of starting with just maybe outlining a little bit more about some of the threats to these primates. I know it's very complex and they're kind of interrelated, the threats, but I've got a question here in terms of what are the greatest threats to langurs in Singapore, and does this differ to threats in Malaysia? So perhaps, you know, like as well the example you gave in North and South Vietnam, in just maybe that's an example as well, perhaps to highlight how threats can differ within a country and for different primates.
I would say that habitat loss and disturbance are definitely one of the major threats for both species. I mean, for the species in both countries. In Singapore, the habitat clearance and disturbance comes mostly through urban development. So the need to construct more housing estates, to build roads and facilities. Whereas in Malaysia, the clearance of habitat mostly is a result of the expansion of plantations like oil palm plantations. And then also because of the different kind of, I would say, situation in Singapore and Malaysia, we have to then go deep down to examine what other threats do the species face. So in both countries, I would say that there is still a lack of awareness on the existence of these species altogether. So, you know, when we talk to residents in Singapore about langurs, many of them would be asking me, what is a langur? Because the monkey that they would see most often is the long-tailed macaque, which is more adaptable and more visible. So they don't really know that there is this critically endangered primate found in the midst of, you know, the forest in Singapore. Whereas in Malaysia, because there are 6 species of non-human primates, so there's the banded langur and also a closely related, I would say, langur species. So that is the dusky langur that you can see on my screen now. And so dusky langurs are, compared to the banded langur, more visible, slightly more adaptable. So residents in Malaysia would see these langur species, which are also black in color with white eye rings and white mouth parts, that they would say, oh yeah, I know there's a banded langur. They often come to my house to, you know, take fruits and, you know, there's a lot of conflicts. But then when we show them photos, we realize that, oh, it's actually the dusky langur. So I would say that there are some threats that are similar across both countries, but yet there are also differences.
Great, yeah. I mean, I appreciate that's a very big question to summarize. So thank you for summarizing the main threats, and really appreciate the, as I say, the complexities at each site. You touched on, as you're talking about Malaysia, in terms of the 6 species you mentioned just now. Could you just give us a bit more, as you say, in terms of thinking about this kind of human primate interface and possible the sharing of that, you know, that ecological social space and implications for human primate conflict in any of the sites that you studied, perhaps in Singapore versus Malaysia, because of that awareness of the primates? What kind of has arisen in terms of conflict in these sites, say for example in Malaysia?
So in Singapore, we have 3 species of non-human primates. The snow loris that mostly is active in the nighttime. So there's not much conflict there because people don't really get to see them. But then there is the issue of the release of exotic lorises into the nature reserves in Singapore. that is threatening the local species of lorises. So this is something that it's kind of happening, not at a rate that we are terribly worried about, but it's happening because of the wildlife trade. The major issue when it comes to human primate interaction, it's when there are, I would say, negative interactions between the long-tailed macaques and people. Because here in Singapore, and also, I guess, in a lot of places in Asia, there's feeding of primates, particularly the really adaptable ones like the long-tailed macaques. So by feeding the macaques, you're actually drawing the animals out from their habitat and into the urban spaces. And when people do not know how to actually interact or not interact with them, there will be issues. So, monkeys might be taking your food. You might be actually feeling frustrated about the interaction such that you are trying to chase the monkey away, and then they might be defensive. And so, conflicts can happen. So this is a major issue that's facing the long-tailed macaques in Singapore and Malaysia. Whereas for the banded langurs, it's a lack of awareness. And so, if the habitat is being cleared for development, it might be hard to actually gather the support from the local community to say that, hey, this area is really important for this species of langurs and other wildlife, because they don't even know about the existence of this species. They would know about the orangutans in Sumatra, and then they would actually care to donate money to support work on orangutans in Indonesia. But because they don't know about this species, they don't know how they can help. Whereas for Malaysia, because we're talking about 6 species, I'm talking about the southern parts of Malaysia, where there are 6 species of non-human primates. So we have the slow loris, the Sunda slow loris. And again, like in Indonesia, the slow loris are being poached from the wild for the wildlife trade. And so they're threatened by that. And then there are 2 species of macaques. So the long-tailed macaques and the southern pig-tailed macaque. So unfortunately, because macaques are more adaptable, they're able to persist in urban settings. And that's when a lot more interactions with humans happen, where they might be foraging in their gardens or taking leftover from their kitchens. And so, when conflicts happen, it might lead to culling of the animals. And then there are also 2 species of langurs in southern Malaysia. So the banded langur and the dusky langur. The dusky langurs are also facing threats by, road collisions. So they have to travel from one place to another when their habitats are being fragmented. And so that's when, road accidents can happen. Whereas for the banded langurs, because they're more shy, sometimes they might not even attempt to cross the road. And that's when the severe effects of fragmentation can kick in, where we are seeing perhaps genetic inbreeding in isolated small populations. And lastly, we have the white-handed gibbons. So white-handed gibbons, they are heavily threatened by habitat clearance, wildlife trade, because, their babies are so cute, just like primate babies are really cute. The moms are being shot to take their babies to be used as photo props at tourist sites. And so these are just some of the threats that I would say generally the primates are facing.
Yeah, it really highlights in terms of thinking about, and as you covered in your talk, in thinking about why we need to have so many approaches to really understand the threats that are faced by primates in different regions and in different countries and within that country as well. And it was great to see a slide for the feces. You're talking to someone who studies feces and really understands and appreciates the value in terms of what we can learn about various primates from fecal samples. And just your discussion in terms of thinking about the conservation efforts. So we've got the non-invasive fecal sample collection, and you highlighted very nicely what we can learn in that respect. We've got also thinking about the corridors and possible connections, and also you just summarised nicely, highlighting just how we have to have that understanding at the local level to really understand some how we can create these interventions or conservation efforts in order to kind of deal with the threats that these different primates are facing. And so I've got quite a few questions on conservation efforts here. And to start with, just thinking about in terms of, you know, the changes in terms of road bridges based on the camera track footage. What are the greatest challenges with implementing conservation strategies such as road bridges, for example, because we can really see the implications, as you say, from habitat fragmentation, from you know, road prevention, or, you know, allowing them to cross and access roads, etc. So what have been some challenges in implementing these?
I would say that when we first explored potentially installing rope bridges, we were pretty naive in thinking that we're just talking about ropes that we can tie on trees, and then that's it. It's simple. The ropes are pretty inexpensive compared to concrete structures like eco-links, where, you know, you have to actually cover different lanes of roads. We're just talking about rope bridges. How difficult would it be? But actually, when it comes to discussing with the relevant agencies, there are many considerations. Because, for example, if you're building a rope bridge that is above a road, there's going to be cars, there's going to be pedestrians. And so that structure cannot fall on people or on cars. There also needs to be like a certain clearance because, I mean, of a height consideration, like how many meters above the ground. But then if you were to put it at this height, would the animals actually use it? Because, you know, perhaps the langurs or other wildlife are using it at a height of, say, 5 to 6 meters, but we have to pay attention to the surroundings and it needs to be at a different height. Would it be useful at all? We can't actually tie it to the trees because of the weather conditions, say like in Singapore, where it's really humid and we have thunderstorms, you know, gusty winds. And so tying the ropes to the trees might actually result in, you know, the tree from compromising due to weight. And so we have to actually build a concrete structure like a pole in order to anchor the ropes on those structures. And so with that, we need to then chat with the relevant other agencies like the Land Transport Authority or some other agencies which are involved in this kind of constructions. And then we have to build it. Then we have to maintain it as well, because we can't just put the bridge there and say, okay, we're done with the job, because it might be functional where the animals use it, but how effective it is, we have to measure frequency of use or like which species are using it. Is it serving its purpose? Is it reducing the number of roadkills? Is it actually facilitating the genetic exchange of isolated populations? And so then we realized that it's actually not that easy, but you know, by working with different individuals, that's when we learned that it can be done collaboratively.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, you know, as you say, highlighting the various bodies involved in just, you know, setting up these bridges and just the implications of that and all the considerations that are needed. Has any of, just to continue a little bit about the road bridges, have you made any changes to your decision making? I think you touched a little bit on, based on camera track footage that you're getting from these road bridges, has that had implications for where you would perhaps put future road bridges, or in terms of the maintenance of that road bridge, for example?
I think perhaps I can highlight two of the things that we were just recently discussing with my collaborators about the road bridges. So number one is that we noticed that some of the arboreal species we thought would be using the bridges were not using. So like the slow lorises or the palm civets, so like the civet cats in the area, they're still kind of, you know, not approaching the bridges at all. So then looking at the structure and, you know, the positioning of the bridges, we realized that the lorises couldn't actually even reach the bridge. because of the aluminum pole that was installed on the side of the road to anchor the bridges. There's actually a gap between that pole and the nearby tree. And we know that the lorises can't actually jump to reach the pole. So we might need to come up, for example, to plant fast-growing lianas and climbers to facilitate or to close that gap so that perhaps the lorises could be encouraged to use. And also, because it's along a road, there are also lights, there are lampposts with lights that are on in the nighttime. And one of the location of the bridges is very close to a lamppost, which it's going to be bright throughout that night. And so perhaps the animals would also not be attracted to come out into the bright area to use the bridge. So that's like some of the considerations that we are looking at. And then another thing that we were discussing, it's on filtering through the camera trap. I would say surveillance camera images. At first, it was set up as a 24-hour surveillance because we want to know which animal, use it a day and a night. And that was kind of bad because we are filtering through like 24-hour footages, months of data. And so we change it to something like a motion sensor, capturing photos and videos. But that's also not ideal because it's too sensitive. Even when a fly was flying past the camera, it will be recording 10 seconds of the image of footage. And so we had to go through a lot of videos. So there's a lot of I would say, technicalities that we need to examine. But overall, we have already seen success in terms of usage by the target species, which is the banded langur. And we also saw other species like the long-tailed macaques, squirrels, and even snakes using the bridge.
Wow, that's amazing. So it really highlights, with the focus on primates, but, the implications this has for other taxa, and also highlighting, the long-term investment needed and the time needed to really understand, how to make these effective. And wow, I can see there's lots of considerations in that respect. And I'm sure many watching who understand some of the challenges with camera traps, as you were just highlighting now, will appreciate the challenges of these different technologies and their uses. So in terms of just thinking about perhaps you were discussing in terms of citizen science, volunteers, conservation education, but perhaps also working with local communities. Could you give an example of, how it's progressed in terms of working with the local community on one of the many projects that you're involved in, what that actually has looked like, and perhaps an outcome of doing so?
So I would say that in 2016, when we first started this long-term project and also the citizen science work, when we are in the nature reserves, we would be maybe asking the local community and the residents, do you know of this species called Raffles banded langurs? It will be like, what is that? So out of 10 people, these are just offhand figures. I don't have the stats, like really the real stats, but offhand, of the 10 people that we talked to, I would say maybe one would know, but they don't even know the name of this species. They only know that it's a black-colored monkey that's bigger than a macaque. But then I would say that 5 years on, because we've been doing this citizen science work in the area, of the 10 people that we would be talking to, 5 of them would know Raffles banded langurs, like the name of this species. And then the other, I would say 3 more people would know that there is this black monkey in the forest. Don't know what's the name, but there's a black monkey. So we only left with that 2 people who will be like, what are you talking about? And so I would say that overall, there is greater awareness of the diversity of primates and wildlife in the area. Because the fact that citizen scientists or volunteers are out there on a regular basis, to, with their binoculars, with their cameras and handphones to take photographs and documenting the species, it actually attracts attention. People will come up to them and ask what you're doing. And then like, why are you doing this? And so this actually spread. And over time, we actually had people come up to us to say, do you know that there's this Raffles banded langur? Are you also here to look for them? I was like, oh, wow. Yeah, show me. And so, I think the fact that this program can, go on, it's not just affecting the volunteers themselves, like, they're collecting data for us, but they're actually spreading the word as well. So I think that's something that we have noticed that's changed over the years. And also we have been tracking the number of media reports and mentions of this species, in the media. So from 2016 to like 2022, there's been an increase in the number of mentions of this species. And previously, there might only be one article in a year about this species, but now there might be 10 articles in a year about this species.
Right, so that's great as well. I just want to say that we're having messages from some of the citizen scientists that have been involved in some of the projects, and are just saying hi. And they're
hello.
very much enjoying
Thank you so much
your talk. Yeah,
for all your work collecting the data.
How long does it take? So we've got some questions, and we will move on to discussing a little bit about the cross-border in a minute. But just before that, in terms of citizen science, how long does it take to train volunteers, and how do you manage to recruit such high numbers? It's very impressive in terms of thinking about the recruitment of citizen science. Volunteers, etc. So could you just give us a little bit more, or tell us a little bit more about that?
So I think at the beginning, the main aim of starting this citizen science program is to generate awareness and to also collect basic information. So we didn't want to make it too academic driven or too challenging, and we want to attract people from various backgrounds, whether is it students, working adults, or seniors, retirees, so that they can all contribute and enjoy actually being out in nature and enjoying nature as itself. For us, we started off with just sharing more about the species, why we are actually doing this citizen science program, what data to collect. So basic information like if you were to see the langurs, the date, the time, the location. So using an app to provide the GPS location, or just using nearby landmarks like the lamppost number, and also number of individuals of langurs that they see, what they're doing. So those are basic descriptive information, behavioral data, like they might be playing or running or feeding. So we don't have like a specific, I would say, target in terms of what kind of data we are hoping to achieve, but in a storytelling manner. They will just share with us what they saw, and we have to filter through those information. So I would say it's a bit challenging curating the information, but they contain lots of valuable data. And then as we progress over time, we were able to actually explore possibly including more information. So such as interactions between the different primate species, long-tailed macaques, the banded langurs. And since 2019, we actually have 2 dusky langurs that came from Malaysia somehow. So the interactions between the langurs in Singapore was also valuable. And that was also through the citizen scientist work that we were able to document grooming between the 2 species, macaques grooming the banded langurs, for example. And we also included a section on documenting road cues. So along the stretch of road that they were surveying, what species of animals did they see, at which location. And so over time, we can then examine whether there are hotspots that we consider to put in some mitigations, whether is it road bridges or speed bumps and such.
Oh, so Thanks. That really highlights, I think, for many of us, the value or incredible contribution in terms of citizen science and what we can learn, as you say, in seeing those trends across various areas, and some very amazing observations that perhaps would have been missed otherwise. Andie, I'm just going to ask a bit now about thinking about, as you just discussed and touched on in your talk, in thinking about cross-border collaborations for conservation efforts of these primates. We have a message here from Ian Redmond. He says he's so glad you're addressing this important topic. And the UN's Convention on Migratory Species currently lists only gorillas and chimpanzees. For governments to collaborate in conservation, could you just share your views as well? It says, I would encourage primatologists with data on transboundary movements to consider whether the species they study might meet these Convention of Migratory Species listing criteria. Do you have some thoughts in terms of perhaps, how we can move forward as primatologists in thinking about data collection to be able to
data collection
about,
and data sharing?
Yeah, sharing or your thoughts on and how we could continue to encourage collection of data and consider how these species, how we can work towards meeting these criteria and thinking about Convention of Migratory Species. What might be some ways of encouraging primatologists to kind of focus and think about transboundary movements and how we can meet these criteria?
Actually, I would like to learn from Ian too, whether there are any advice that we can actually, I would say, use in order to facilitate that collaboration. Because I would say that, first of all, to identify the right partners and collaborators, it's extremely important, so that we can actually align the strategy and the goals, because different individuals, different researchers might have different intentions when it comes to research and conservation. No right or wrong, but to really identify the right partners, or to try to, still work together to achieve different goals is still possible, but it will require a lot of time. And COVID didn't really help, because I would say that prior to COVID, there were already ongoing discussions, and it's important to start from various, to go in from various sectors. So one is to the universities and to schools, so that we can identify the manpower needed to do the research and the data collection. At the same time, we also need to be, approaching the NGOs, like the nature societies or the civil societies in both countries, so that we can come up with ways where there can be data sharing and I would say amplifying the efforts of education in both countries of the shared natural heritage. So for that part, it was also ongoing. And then another major section that we wanted to tackle, it's the government to government interactions, because in Singapore we have like one agency that's overseeing the country's conservation efforts, but for Malaysia, for example, there will be a state level, there will be a federal level, because Malaysia is so big, there are states and federal authorities involved, and so that layer of agency and authority require more, I would say, time and efforts to navigate. It's not easy. And so I would say I'm still working on it. I don't really have a lot of good advice. So if you guys have any advice to share, that would really help.
I think that already there's some great advice there in terms of time investment, acknowledging all the different bodies involved, and also there's been a question which you've touched on there in terms of the impact, of course, of COVID-19 on these collaborative efforts for conservation, cross-border conservation. Just before before we go, there's still questions, many questions here, and just would just ask one more, and that is, you know, you've obviously started a working group, and so I've got a question here. What does the process of starting a working group look like, and how did you get people involved and gather interest, for example, for the Raffles banded langurs?
I think firstly, the IUCN Primate Specialist Group and also the Conservation Breeding Specialist Group helped a lot in kickstarting the process, because the purpose of forming a working group is to round up all the experts and their knowledge and resources to come in so that we can work together to actually deliver, to actually produce and deliver a species action plan. Because I think one of the challenges when it comes to creating action plans is that once it's created, they are being shelved. And so it's very hard to then, you know, say a few years later to say, what have we done? Have we actually achieved the objectives of the action plan when there is no, I would say, working group to make sure that, you know, time over time, the objectives are being achieved, or like, you know, we're trying to achieve those objectives. And so IUCN help a lot. And the fact that a funding agency, so Wildlife Reserves Singapore Conservation Fund, which is a charity organization from Singapore Zoo and now Mandai Nature, they provided the funding to support 2 persons, so me and a few partners, to oversee the action plan and the working group. So having full-time staff to oversee the work is extremely important, because it's very challenging to rely on voluntary effort to make sure that the action plan is being carried out. So the fact that we are having 2 manpower full-time to look at the action plan, to communicate with the different partners on a regular basis, to identify what has been done, what has not been done, what cannot be done, and then regularly every 2 years to, you know, produce a report on, you know, what we have achieved, help a lot. So I think having a full-time staff or a team to oversee the working group or to chair the working group and the action plan would be a good first step.
That's great. That's great advice. Thanks so much, Andie. That's I'm sure for those thinking about starting working groups. That's great advice. I think there are still questions, but I think we're going to leave it there. There are some also requests. Are you happy for people to email you? They'd like to get in contact with you. Is that okay? They're just asking. So if you're happy for that, there's just some messages of people asking that. Well, thank you so much, Andie, for your time and for, you know, a really interesting talk covering so many aspects, and in your responses as well to questions, is covering so many factors to consider in the conservation of these primates, cross-border collaborations, just the logistical challenges, the time investment needed, and just incredible work and incredible efforts that you and others are doing to work towards the conservation of these Asian primates. So
thank you so much.
No, thank you. Just before we go, I'm just going to say the Primate Conversations talk for the 22nd of February, Nancy Stevens, has been cancelled, but please watch your space. Hopefully we'll have Nancy back to talk about faunal evolution, environmental change in the through time in the Rift Basin of Tanzania. And the next Primate Conversation talk will be on the 1st of March by Charlotte Cantaloupe on discussing social networks to social learning in wild vervet monkeys. That will be at 3 o'clock UK time. So thank you everyone for joining us. But again, thank you so much, Andie, for a wonderful talk and joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.